She reached out with a trembling hand, grabbed the strap of the waitress's dress, and pulled with all the force her anger could gather. The fabric tore with a sound so sharp that the entire restaurant went silent. Forks froze in midair. Conversations died. And in that single frozen moment, nobody in that room, least of all the woman doing the tearing, had any idea that the waitress kneeling on the floor, gathering the pieces of her torn dress with shaking fingers, was about to change the life of everyone watching. Because the man walking through the front door in the next 60 seconds wasn't just late for dinner. He was the billionaire owner of the entire company, standing behind that cruel CEO. And what he was about to do would not just humiliate the guilty. It would remind an entire room full of strangers what real kindness looks like when it finally shows up. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, if you believe kindness is still the most powerful force in this world, then take a second to hit that subscribe button, tap like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This channel is called Kindness Waves, and every single week we bring you real, heartfelt stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things with nothing but compassion. Now, let's get back to that restaurant, because what happens next will stay with you long after the video ends. Her name was Maria Delgado, and she had been on her feet since 4 that afternoon. The restaurant was called the Amber Room, a sleek, glass-walled place in downtown Chicago where the tablecloths cost more than her weekly grocery budget and the wine list read like a foreign language. Maria wasn't supposed to be working the VIP section that night. Her co-worker Denise had called in sick with a fever, and the manager, desperate and short-staffed, had pointed at Maria and said, "You're on table 12 tonight. Big party. Don't mess it up." Table 12 was reserved for the executives of Hallbrook Industries, a shipping and logistics company that had just closed one of the biggest deals of the year. At the head of that table sat Richard Hallbrook, the company's CEO, a man known throughout the office for his sharp tongue and sharper temper. Beside him sat his girlfriend, Vanessa Pierce, dressed in a shimmering emerald gown, diamonds catching the light every time she moved her head, which she did often, mostly to make sure people were looking at her. Maria had been warned about tables like this. She had learned, over 3 years of waitressing, how to read a room the second she stepped into it, who would tip generously, who would barely look at her, and who would treat her like she wasn't a person at all. Table 12, she could tell within the first 10 minutes, belonged firmly in that last category. It started small. Vanessa snapped her fingers to get Maria's attention instead of simply calling her over. She sent back a perfectly good glass of wine because she claimed it smelled cheap. She made a comment to the man beside her, not quietly enough, about how some people just aren't cut out for anything better than serving food. Maria absorbed each comment the way she always did, with a straight spine, a polite smile, and silence. Because silence paid the bills and dignity, she had learned, was a luxury she often couldn't afford to display. But the real trouble began when Maria was delivering the main courses. The tray was heavy, 8 plates of seared salmon and filet mignon balanced with the kind of practiced precision that came from years of experience. As she leaned in to place a plate in front of Richard Hallbrook, Vanessa shifted in her seat at exactly the wrong moment, and the edge of the tray brushed against her glass of red wine. It wasn't Maria's fault. Anyone watching closely could see that. But the wine tipped, a small crimson wave spilling across the white tablecloth and catching the very edge of Vanessa's emerald gown. Vanessa shot up from her chair, so fast it nearly toppled backward. "Are you kidding me?" she shouted, loud enough that heads turned from 3 tables away. "Do you know how much this dress cost? Do you have any idea?" "I'm so sorry," Maria said quickly, already reaching for a cloth napkin. "Let me help you clean that up right away. Don't touch me," Vanessa snapped, jerking backward. And then, in a moment that would replay in the minds of everyone in that restaurant for years afterward, she reached out and grabbed the strap of Maria's uniform dress. Not to steady herself, not by accident, but out of pure, uncontrolled rage, and yanked. The seam at Maria's shoulder gave way with a tearing sound that seemed to echo off the restaurant's high ceilings. Maria stumbled back, one hand flying up to hold the torn fabric against her chest, her face flooding with a heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with humiliation. The tray she had been holding clattered to the floor, and for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "You clumsy, worthless girl," Vanessa hissed, loud enough for every table nearby to hear. "This dress is worth more than you'll make in a year. People like you shouldn't even be allowed near people like us." Richard Holbrook, to his credit or perhaps his shame, said nothing. He simply sat there, swirling the ice in his glass, watching the scene unfold with the detached expression of a man who had long ago decided that other people's dignity wasn't his problem to defend. Maria knelt down on the polished floor, gathering the shattered pieces of a dropped plate, her torn dress slipping slightly off her shoulder, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall in front of these people. She had bills to pay. A younger brother in community college who depended on the money she sent home. A mother back in Texas recovering from a knee surgery. She could not afford to lose this job over a moment of someone else's cruelty, no matter how badly her chest burned with the injustice of it. That was the exact moment the front door of the Amber Room swung open, and a tall man in a simple gray coat walked in, scanning the room the way people do when they're looking for someone specific. His name was James Whitfield, and almost nobody in that restaurant recognized him, because James Whitfield made a point of never looking the part. He wore no flashy watch, no tailored three-piece suit, nothing that screamed wealth or power. He looked, if anything, like an ordinary man who had just finished a long day at an ordinary job. But James Whitfield was the founder and majority owner of Whitfield Holdings, the parent company that had quietly acquired Holbrook Industries 8 months earlier in a deal so private that only a handful of senior executives even knew his face. He had come to the Amber Room that night for a quiet, low-key dinner with an old friend from college, nothing more. He had no idea Richard Holbrook's team would be celebrating in the same restaurant. But as he stepped further inside, his eyes caught the scene at table 12. A woman in a torn dress kneeling on the floor, a room full of well-dressed people, either staring or deliberately looking away, and a woman in emerald green still shouting insults down at her, like she was scolding a disobedient dog. James didn't rush over dramatically. He didn't shout or make a scene of his own. He simply walked, calm and steady, toward table 12 and knelt down beside Maria before anyone else in that restaurant had moved a single muscle to help her. "Are you hurt?" he asked her quietly, his voice low enough that it was just for her. Maria looked up, startled, her cheeks streaked with the tears she could no longer hold back. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I just need a minute." James took off his gray coat without hesitation and draped it gently over her shoulders, covering the torn dress with a quiet dignity that no amount of money could have purchased. Then he stood, turned to face Vanessa Pierce, and for the first time that night, his calm expression shifted into something colder. "What exactly happened here?" he asked, his voice even, but carrying a weight that made the surrounding tables go quiet. Vanessa, still flushed with anger and entirely unaware of who she was speaking to, waved a dismissive hand. "This clumsy waitress spilled wine all over my dress and made scene. I don't see how this is any of your business." "It became my business," James said, "the moment I saw a grown woman tear another human being's clothing off her back over a spilled glass of wine." A ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby tables. Richard Holbrook finally set down his glass, sensing, perhaps for the first time, that something about this stranger's presence didn't fit the room the way it should have. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Vanessa snapped, her voice rising again, though with a flicker of uncertainty now creeping into it. "No," James said simply, "but I know exactly who this young woman is. Her name is Maria." He turned to the restaurant manager, who had come rushing over the moment the shouting started, wringing his hands nervously. "Get her a new uniform, get her whatever she needs, and make sure she is compensated for tonight, fully, generously, regardless of anything else that happens in this room." Then James turned back to Richard Holbrook, and something in his tone shifted from calm to unmistakably serious. "Richard," he said, "I don't believe we've formally met in person, though I imagine you'll recognize the name once I say it. James Whitfield, Whitfield Holdings." The color drained from Richard Holbrook's face almost instantly. Whitfield Holdings wasn't just a name to him. It was the company that now controlled 60% of Hallbrook Industries, the silent majority owner who had the power, with a single signature, to reshape his entire career. Mr. Whitfield, Richard stammered, rising so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. I had no idea you were. We didn't realize. I understand, James said evenly. Most people don't recognize me. I prefer it that way. It lets me see how people really treat others when they think no one important is watching. He glanced back at Vanessa, whose confident posture had crumbled into something small and uncertain. Tonight, I watched a woman humiliate a hard-working person who did absolutely nothing wrong, simply because she believed that person had less value than everyone else sitting at this table. That tells me a great deal about the culture being celebrated here tonight. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now, every table straining to listen without appearing to listen. James turned his attention back to Maria, who had risen to her feet, his coat still wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Maria, he said gently, I'd like to speak with you privately, if that's all right. Not about tonight's incident, but about your future. A person with your patience and grace under pressure like that doesn't belong on her knees, picking up broken plates. I have a feeling you're capable of a great deal more than this room has ever given you credit for. Maria stared at him, stunned, unsure whether she was more surprised by the offer or by the simple fact that someone with obvious power had chosen, in a room full of people, to kneel beside her first. Word of what happened at the Amber Room spread quickly, not through news headlines or gossip columns, but through something far more powerful. The quiet retelling of ordinary people who had witnessed it firsthand. A busboy told his sister. A nearby diner posted a short, respectful account online, careful not to name names, simply describing a stranger who stood up for a waitress when no one else would. Within the company itself, whispers moved through the hallways of Hallbrook Industries faster than any official memo ever could. 3 weeks later, Richard Hallbrook resigned from his position as CEO, citing personal reasons, in a brief statement that satisfied no one who had heard the real story. Vanessa Pierce quietly disappeared from the social circle she had once dominated, her invitations drying up one by one as word continued to spread about the kind of person she had shown herself to be in a moment she thought didn't matter. Maria, meanwhile, was offered a position in Whitfield Holdings' customer relations training department. Not as charity, James made sure to clarify, but because her years of handling difficult people with grace had taught her more about patience and problem-solving than most business school graduates ever learn in a classroom. She accepted, nervous but hopeful, and within a year, she was leading training sessions for new hires across 3 different company locations, teaching them the very thing she had lived through herself. That everyone, regardless of the uniform they wear or the job title on their name tag, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. She used part of her new salary to help her brother finish his final year of college. She flew her mother out from Texas to see the office where she now worked, watching her mother's eyes well up with tears at the sight of her daughter's name on an actual office door. And every single day, when new employees walked nervously into her training sessions, unsure of what to expect, Maria greeted them the exact same way, with warmth, with patience, and with the quiet understanding of someone who knew firsthand just how much a single act of kindness could change the entire direction of a person's life. James Whitfield never spoke publicly about what happened that night at the Amber Room. He wasn't interested in praise or recognition. When asked about it once, years later, by a young reporter who had heard the story secondhand, he simply said, I didn't do anything remarkable. I just did what anyone should do when they see someone else being treated unfairly. The remarkable part isn't what I did. It's how rarely people actually do it. And maybe that's the real heart of this story. Not the billionaire, not the torn dress, not even the dramatic reveal in a crowded restaurant. The real heart of it is this. Kindness doesn't require wealth, power, or a perfectly timed entrance. It simply requires the willingness to kneel down beside someone who has been knocked to the floor, literally or otherwise, and remind them that they still matter. Somewhere right now, In a restaurant, an office, a grocery store checkout line, someone is being made to feel small by another person's careless cruelty. And somewhere close by, someone else has the choice. The same choice James Whitfield made that night. To either look away or step forward. The world doesn't need more people with money and power. It needs more people willing to use whatever they have, big or small, to lift someone else back up. So if this story touched you tonight, carry a piece of it with you tomorrow. Be the person who kneels down instead of the one who looks away. Be the stranger who offers their coat, their time, their voice, when someone else has none left to give. Because kindness, real kindness, has a way of rippling outward further than we ever expect, changing not just one life, but every life it touches afterward. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Waves, hit that like button, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist in this world. Tell us in the comments what part of this story touched you the most. And until next time, keep choosing kindness, because you never know whose life you might quietly change.